Hello, Elaine.
Roberta.
How are you?
Well, I'm doing okay. I think I need to move because there's too much light coming in the window for me to sit here. Roberta, I was, in terms of introducing you, I was thinking of just doing a briefer version of what I did the last time. Is that okay?
That's fine. There's a lot to talk about.
Yes, I know. Well, I remember your presentation from, what was it? Was it TIAR? No, it wasn't that. What was it that Rock Acts? What did I sit in on?
I did one for TIAR, but I also did one for Rock Acts, the Religious Leaders Caucus. But this one's different. I designed it differently for you guys. I designed each one according to its population and whatever new research I've stumbled across or something's popped up. Yeah, I just kind of say, well, let's revamp this. So this is totally revamped. Well, not totally. You'll recognize some components, but it is in a different kind of format this time.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Oh, and I saw your note about they want to do like a satellite kind of thing.
You know, I passed that on to you, Roberta, because did you hear from Nancy Simpson about
She said that you guys put a lot of ideas into a pot and then about what classes you want. And then whichever ones seem most relevant at the time is what's chosen. So it might be chosen and it might not be chosen. It all depends on what's going on. And, you know, you also have the recording. So I know some of your members must have been watching because Jim Tappan gave a presentation at TIAR and he mentioned it to me.
Ah, okay.
So he had just watched it.
Okay. All right, good. Well, your reputation goes before you and behind you and around you, and certainly is gaining steam, Roberta. People become aware of these interests and talents of yours, which is a wonderful thing.
That's sweet. That's sweet. It's just nice to be able to do things again. It's taken me a long time to recover my health.
I know.
To this extent.
I know. I know. Oh, I was just going to mention that Jonathan, you know, I'm really sorry. I cannot pronounce his last name.
Me either. I know who you mean though.
Yeah, and he has I have asked him to say it so that I could, but then I forget it. So yeah. It's not, but anyway, he's going to do the land. Good morning, Cora.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, let me see.
Go ahead.
I better check to make sure I can get this thing up here. Let me see if I can share my screen.
I now have access to the church Zoom. So if there's an issue, then I can fix it.
I think of Corey as being able to fix anything. So I just
that is very generous of you and completely untrue.
Well,
however, I like the way you think.
Compared to my own, I mean, everything is sort of relative to your own, and so relative to my ability, your abilities soar.
There it is.
You found it. All
I
right.
did. All right. Let me see what you're seeing. Are you seeing something that says critical race theory?
We are.
Yes. All right.
There's the slideshow. Great.
Hey, and I'm seeing your pictures.
Hey.
Oh,
Remember
you did
last
it.
time I couldn't
That's
see
right.
anybody? I'm
Oh,
seeing
yeah.
pictures.
All right,
Hey,
well-
that's pretty cool.
Don't change a thing, Roberta.
Okay. I won't touch anything. All right, that's fantastic. Oh, and you did hear about Kathy, didn't you, Elaine?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. Ginny called me.
okay,
And I knew when I got her call, I knew what it
Oh.
was.
yeah.
I don't even know who to send a card to, Roberta.
Maria, but I don't know where they are, whether they're back in the Southern Tier or they're still at her house. And you could probably send it to that post office box because they may be still picking up her mail
Yeah, but
periodically.
Roberta, I don't have a post office box. Is that something you could send to me?
I will. I'll
Thank
send it to you. Let me
Thank
write myself a note.
So Bob, I see that you're on. I think you're on. Are you on, Bob?
He's muted and not at his screen.
Okay.
It looks like.
Corey, I was telling Roberta that unless, do you want to introduce Roberta this morning, Corey? Would you like to do that?
Do you want to not introduce her?
No, what I was going to do was just a bit of a shortened version of what she provided us that I did last time, but and I'm
Well,
happy to do that.
yeah, if you don't mind, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with life.
I can understand that. You said yes to so many wonderful things. I mean, it's just,
Whew.
yeah. So you are the what is it, of session, you and Nancy, right?
I'm a shadowing co-clerk, yes.
A
It-
shadowing co-clerk, okay.
I didn't think it was, I mean, she and John were supposed to do that up before. And so I wanted to help if possible, but sometimes explaining to somebody else how to do things takes longer than just doing it. So that's why I'm shadowing for now.
Okay. Roberta, I'm not seeing you now.
Oh, you're not? I'm still seeing you.
There you are. There you are. Good. It
Yeah,
must.
I haven't touched anything except to find a little pictures that show you where to move the slides. I haven't done anything else.
Okay. So there. Oh, good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning.
Sorry if I can't see all of you.
I'm just sorting myself out over here. I'll be ready at 9.
Okay.
I spotlit Roberta for a second to see what happened, and then all of the rest of us disappeared from my view. So I had to reset the gallery.
Yeah, I noticed that. Good morning, Marie.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm going to be in and out, and Peggy is going to be mostly here. So I'll be listening, but you'll probably be seeing her, okay?
Okay.
Nice to see you, Roberta. Thanks for being with us again.
Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
You are always welcome.
Thank you. Elaine, the one thing I would ask is that when I'm done and it's time for discussion, can we turn off the recording so that people can feel freer to talk? This is a very controversial subject and I don't want them to feel.
We can do that.
Thank you. I was at something else earlier in the week and people were complaining that they were being recorded. I think people are feeling surveilled and That's not a nice feeling.
Yeah, that's true. Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning. Sorry if I cannot see you. I'm sorry. Wait. Mm. Hmm. What time are your church services usually on a Sunday morning?
11.
11.
Yeah. And they're meeting indoors now.
Oh, really? In person?
So it's both. It's
Oh, okay.
both in
Wow.
person and via Zoom. Yeah. I have
Yeah.
no idea what the attendance is in person. Last week, they did some scanning of the cameras around. There were a number of people there. So
Oh,
John just said
wow.
about 30. He's usually there in the choir and he counts.
Wow.
Plus the choir. 30 plus the
That's
choir.
amazing.
yeah. Let's see. Bob, is that you? Yeah, it is. Welcome. Well, we've got two Bobs now. Hi, Bob, and hi, Bob.
There we are. Now I'm audible, aren't I?
Yeah.
Great.
Morning, Mary.
I gotta set up, Jim. I'll be right back.
Morning, Becky.
Morning. Good morning. Oh, I hear more doorbells.
Those are doorbells, aren't they?
Yeah.
Morning, Marilyn. Oh, she's muted. Well, probably most everyone is. Shall we probably should ask people to mute during your presentation, Roberta.
Okay.
Yeah.
They can unmute themselves as I ask questions.
Yeah. Yes. Let's see. Good morning, Elvira. And good morning, Nancy.
Tell me if it's too loud for you.
Good morning, Peggy.
Morning. This is left.
Morning.
What am I doing here?
You get this set up and then I'll give you your cereal. I told you to eat before.
Good morning, iPad. That's all that I can see from. Maybe that's Jim. Hi. Hi, Joan.
Good morning.
Well, you know, I know, Roberta, that you have a good deal to share with us. So even though there are probably others that are going to be joining, Corey, are you okay with our getting started?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as soon as Jonathan returns, then you could get started.
And has he
And-
returned?
Yep.
I'm here. Yep.
All right, good, good.
So we'll start with a land acknowledgement. And for those who were on the previous Sunday forum, we had a version we have been reading, but after the great discussion and information from Roberta, I took another crack at writing it specifically for this church. So go with me here. This is going to be a little bit of a journey. It's going to sound similar in the beginning, and then it's going to go off.
That sounds fantastic. That's exactly right.
So yep, wish us luck as we begin our journey. We open this space with reverence and respect for the work we are undertaking by acknowledging that the land we are situated is the seized territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which includes the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, and Tuscarora nations. We pay respect to their elders past and present, and will take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that enable us to be here together today. We are encouraged to work toward partnership with our Indigenous brothers and sisters with a spirit of reconciliation, collaboration, and address the historic injustices toward Indigenous peoples harmed by the Presbyterian Church and other religious institutions in their exercise of the doctrine of discovery. This starts with acknowledging the 2017 PCUSA formal apology to the Native Americans in Alaska, especially to those who are part of the stolen generation during the Indian assimilation movement, namely former students of Indian boarding schools and their families and their communities. Building on that apology, we commit to also address the historic injustices by reviewing the list of Presbyterian affiliated Native American schools so that we understand the church's complicity with the doctrine of discovery in different states and mission, identifying those harmed, and third, collaborating to help heal, reconcile, and provide reparations to those harmed. We should also collaborate with national and local spiritual and faith communities to ensure that our lectionary and teachings explain and explore what it means to, 1, repudiate the doctrine of discovery, 2, support our local Indigenous brothers and sisters, and third, rethink our relationship with each other, our community, and the environment where we live as well as globally. And I'll end with a quote from Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Action on behalf of life transforms because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal. It is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us. And that's it. And that last bit, by the way, thank you, Corey, for that suggestion. So that is the land acknowledgement we're going to work with, I think, moving forward. And the justice team, I think, is going to, I want to read it with them, and then we talk about how we might further tweak it. Anyway, that was the land acknowledgement.
Wanishi. Oh my goodness, Shiki, beautiful, beautiful. That was excellent, Jonathan. Thank you so much. That's what I mean by land acknowledgements that touch your heart and move your spirit. That's exactly it.
Yeah, and I thank you. I mean, you pointed out things that I didn't even know about within the Presbyterian Church, and I was like, we gotta figure out how to put that into the land acknowledgement and take ownership of it. So
it's beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. No introductions needed. I'm Roberta Davis, invited here to talk with you about critical race theory. And as you may know, I do have African American and Native American heritage, so it's my pleasure to be able to explore these issues with you. I think it furthers all of our growth and spiritual development, and that's what we're about, no matter our spiritual traditions or practices. So I'd like to open with prayer. I am learning the Lenape language. I take classes with my nation, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania, and we are speaking or learning to speak the Unami dialect, the there were 3 Lenape dialects, and the one we're learning is the same one they speak in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, where there is a large congregation or population of Lenape people. Once we were displaced and moved, many of our ancestors moved out there. So we're following that tradition, and that's the language. So I'll begin with prayer. Gatamak Tunhe, I speak humbly. Alawi ahokwasi kishalemieng, most beloved creator. Kamilihana lechele cheoken, kaname wakehana. You give us life. We thank you. Wemi weltek keku enda kamilihana, kaname wakehana. For all the good things you have given us, we thank you. Kachitani tehana eli wilaponzit, kaname wakehana. We are of strong mind because of good teachings. We thank you. Ksi, wichaminen, kupamaskahana machetamakan. Please help us to walk the good road. Ksi, wichaminen daholtihana. Please help us to love each other. Wichitun te nachka ok wililisawaken hingo kanimen. With voice, heart, hands, and good deeds, we praise you. Kwatak hanel hi le huhene kamishale mieng kiluna ahotawakan o kiluna walatanamawakan. We send it to you, Creator, our love and our joy. Na nelekich, let it be so. I fumbled some of those words, but I'm still working on this.
We didn't know, Roberta. It's okay.
My teacher wouldn't have been as pleased as I would like her to be. So what are we going to do today? So we do have some learning objectives for today. And I'm going to apologize that this particular presentation is going to be more instructive than the last one, simply due to the deliberate misinformation that has been put out by the media and social media and other various actors about critical race theory, about what it is and what its intention is about. So I need to make sure that we all have a basic understanding of what critical race theory really is and how it originated and what it hopes to do. So learning objectives to be able to explain some of this development, the overview and basic tenets of CRT. We are going to be using Lady Justice as our metaphor for the American justice system, and that's the metaphor that I want you to hold in place as we are talking about CRT, because you will discover that that's what CRT is about. So Lady Justice is our metaphor. We're going to talk about some applications of CRT. We're going to analyze behavior for perceptions and demonstrations of threat. And hopefully you will be able to create and evaluate a plan of action in response to CRT and what's happening around it on a couple of different levels that we'll talk about in a bit. So let me show you the metaphor that we will be using as part of our discussion this morning. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with Lady Justice. The Roman goddess Justitia, she's all about divine order and law and natural law and custom. And what does that mean? Well, divine order, we seem to have some sort of belief that there is this divine law and order that is above simple human ordinance. And this figure that stands outside of our Supreme Court is calling us into that divine space so that when we are making these laws, we know that there's this higher power that is directing us. That it's about law, which is the fair and equal administration of the law without corruption, greed, prejudice, or favor. That it is about natural law. Supposedly, we believe in these unchanging moral principles as a basis for human conduct. And we could probably spend hours discussing what exactly are these moral principles. And this becomes part of the problem, I think, sometimes with justice in this country. What are these unchanging moral principles? And last of all, we've got custom, which is, you know, the traditions. What have we done in the past? How have we handled justice? And that's something else that's going to need to be talked about. Now, she's got a lot of symbols that I'm sure you're familiar with. We've got the scales of justice. Justice is to remain balanced and pragmatic, sensible, practical, realistic. She is to weigh the sides of the evidence, the competing claims, and weighing each side to see which one has more substance to it. It is a double-edged sword. It is unsheathed. That sword is to show that she has moral authority, that she has respect. It is unsheathed to show that it's going to be transparent, that justice should be swift and final. And she is blindfolded. And we know that that means objectivity, impartiality, fair treatment, and that no one is to be judged by appearance, power, status, fame, or wealth. This toga outfit is also a mantle of responsibility and the high level of philosophical understanding that we expect from those who enforce justice and practice law. The book is supposed to represent the Constitution, the body of laws that govern this nation. And just like if you were in a Catholic church and look at a statue of Mary, the mother of Jesus, she will oftentimes have a snake underneath her foot. So does Lady Justice, to show that she is stamping out evil. Remember, this is a divine order, so we are looking for good. So let's recall what we talked about the last time, because the last time we were together, we talked about the history of Native Americans. And I think Jonathan stated it perfectly. What we talked about in terms of their experience of justice in this culture was genocide. And so that was happening here in this nation, but we also have other peoples that we need to talk about. So as we're looking at this figure of Lady Justice, we need to talk about Africans and what happened with that doctrine of discovery. Not only did it seize the pagan heathen lands of Native Americans and Native peoples all over the globe, it initiated that transatlantic slave trade. And what did that mean? Well, that meant that there were a lot of people who were sold into slavery, taken into slavery, kidnapped into slavery, and sent all over the world to work on farms and plantations, which was a European concept of this monocrop system. And in 1619, the magical date here in this country, the first slaves arrived in Virginia and were sold. And that started the process of enslavement here in North America. So why do I mention that? Because as we see, society has certain structures, it adopts certain laws in response to that. So we need to begin to see this pattern of society, laws, society, laws. So, okay, we've got this enslavement system. We formulate laws. And what were these laws? They were slave codes. So we've got this enslavement system. We've got all these enslaved peoples. What are we going to do about this? Because problems arise, they're running off, they're having uprisings. How are we going to protect their owners? So we come up with these slave laws. And basically it just tells everybody what the rights, roles, responsibilities are for everyone. So the owners know that if these slaves run away, there'll be laws to get them back, that these are property, that they can be treated as property, they can be sold at will, the families can be disbanded, children sold off. They're property, like cattle. The slaves need to know that no, you're not allowed to marry. No, you may not congregate in large groups. No, you may not leave this plantation without express permission of your owner. And yes, they have every right to discipline you as they see fit. So these slave laws come into effect. All right, so that system is set up. We've got enslavement, we got the laws that accompany it. Well, you know what happens. We decide that the Europeans who come here decide that they like it. They get sick of King George, and we've got the American Revolution, and we're going to form a new nation. So what does that mean? Well, if you form a new nation, you've got to have laws to govern it. So we have the Articles of Confederation, societal structure, laws that accompany it. Well, King George isn't too happy, and you know what that means. We're going to enter into a war. The Americans win. In case you hadn't noticed, the Americans win. And what are we going to do? Well, we've got a whole new nation. We need a constitution. So, new nation, we need a stronger body of laws that are going to dictate who we are. And we ratify that law in 1788. And of course, later on, people are kind of upset about the protections for citizens in this country. So we come up with these first 12 amendments, the first 10 known as the Bill of Rights. We know what our rights, roles, and responsibilities are as citizens. And we also know the role, rights, and responsibilities of our government, how it's structured, and what it's going to do for us. Well, even in the beginning, those of you who are historians know there was a lot of problems going on, even from the beginning. What is the role of the federal government going to be? What is the role of the state government going to be? What about these enslaved peoples? What is this happening down in the South? How are they being treated? How much money are you really earning down there? All these kind of things are happening. And also, the founding fathers kind of realized that they're not really living up to the proclamation of the Constitution, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all men are created equal, with this enslavement stuff going on. So compromises have to be made. And that's all part of our Constitution. All these compromises and, trying to make everybody happy. Well, things go well for a while and then chaos. What happens? We have a civil war between the North and the South, and oh, it's terrible, it's horrible. And what happens? Well, the Union forces win. And now Lincoln frees these enslaved people. We have a new social order. And we enter into this period of the first Reconstruction, and with it have to come new laws, because you've got to put a law in to free the slaves. You've got to make them citizens and give them equal protection under the law. And you have to protect them and give them voting rights. So these Reconstruction amendments have to be made. New social order, Reconstruction amendments. Okay, well, as many of you know, the Confederates did not take too kindly to this new social order, and there's almost immediate backlash. And what happens is they form these white leagues, which are terrorist groups that are going to oppress these now called freedmen, and they're going to try to put things back the way they like them. And they start stripping away at all these freedoms and new laws that have been granted by the federal government. The states, especially these southern states, are not in compliance with what the federal level of government is saying. So we've got this power struggle going on. And so what they do is they enact what's called Black codes. And these are the codes that they impose on these freedmen, these newly freed enslaved people. And basically, yes, you've got more rights, but as far as labor is concerned, you may be farmers and servants. We only want you purchasing certain types of property. we want this, we want that. There are all these concessions that the freedmen have to make. Meanwhile, these formerly enslaved people are trying to take hold of their citizenship. They're being elected to office. They're trying to establish their lives. Meanwhile, there's this backlash against that, and these Black codes come into effect. What also happens is the Supreme Court itself starts chipping away at the freedoms given by the Reconstruction Amendments. So what happens? Well, you know what happens. 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. We have another change of the social order. What happens? Change of the social order, Jim Crow laws. And what does that mean? You sit at the back of the bus. You're not welcome in this restaurant. That water fountain is only for whites. And as part of this, we have the KKK and other white terrorist groups that are trying to make sure that these formerly enslaved people know their place in this society. So what we've got are these competing claims and these clashes and conflicts. And we also have Lady Justice overseeing this process, okay? So what does Jim Crow mean? It means a general diminishing of life, a pushback into servitude and incarceration, lynchings, and outright terrorism. Well, I have to tell you, enslaved people have been fighting since enslavement to get themselves free of this. And once these Jim Crow laws come into effect, the Black community has just had enough. And we have something called the Civil Rights Movement, which is known as the Second Reconstruction. And Blacks begin to once again assert their right to citizenship. They start to enter political office. They start to kind of improve their status. And because of the Civil Rights Movement, once again, the law changes. So here we are, finally, at the legal results of the Civil Rights Movement, the Second Reconstruction. So 1954, we have Brown versus the Board of Education, where Thurgood Marshall successfully defends the argument to desegregate the schools. This led to the desegregating of lots of different institutions. We had the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and I'm sure you're familiar with that because that's one of the acts that is trying to be undermined at this time. We had the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Everybody's happy. Legislation ended segregation, Black voter suppression, discriminatory employment and housing practices. And for those of you who were living at this time, you probably, especially if you're a person of color, you probably remember everybody kind of giving this sigh of relief. We finally have this society sorted out. It's going to be so good for everybody. We've got the laws in place, the protections in place. We can relax and really fulfill our destiny as Americans and fulfill Lady Justice and the aspirations of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. You tell me, is that what happens? Please unmute yourselves. Is that what happened?
No.
Anybody want to disagree with her? Any disagreement with that? Well, that's what CRT is about. That's what CRT is about. Because there were already legal scholars in place. of every shade and dimension, of every color. And they began with this essential question: why is the progress made during the 60s stalled, stymied, regressing, in spite of new legislation, laws, policies, and protections? So you've got all these legal scholars who are watching this process. Of course they would be. This is their field of study. This is what they've devoted their lives to. Because people thought this was settled. So they begin developing alternative legal theories and frameworks for combating racial inequality. So they're going to look around them to see what's available to them in terms of their theories, philosophies. They look at everything: critical legal studies, critical theory, feminist theory, postmodernism, cultural studies. And in 1989, the first workshop is held. They bring together a multidisciplinary panel of scholars and students and activists. And that's the birth date of CRT. So it's been around since 1989. It is nothing new. Now, it is based on critical legal studies. And basically, this is just saying that the law is necessarily intertwined with social issues, and that the law has inherent social biases. This particular theory claims that the law supports those who create the law. It supports a power dynamic which favors the privileged and disadvantages the historically underprivileged, and that the law has been used as a tool of oppression to maintain dominance of certain groups. Radical feminism was a philosophy that emphasized the patriarchal roots of inequality between men and women. And it talked about the social domination of women. And it looked at existing political and societal organizations as structures as inherently tied to patriarchy. Also, it was drawing upon European philosophers, and this is where you're going to hear a lot of the pushback against CRT as well, because one of the philosophers they looked at was Karl Marx. And I'm sure those of you who have done any social justice work have read or at least gazed at the Communist Manifesto. This bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, that there's the oppressed and the oppressor, that you've got the workers and you've got the owners, this class clash, okay? That's all part of Marxism, communism, and this understanding that society is basically a conflict over food, water, land, money, material goods. So you're going to hear this a lot. CRT is Marxist, it's communist, because they did look at Karl Marx to understand what is happening in society. They also looked at sociology. They used Emil Durkheim and Max Weber, co-founders, some of them anyway, of sociology, the need to study society itself to understand what is happening. They also, this is another one, Michel Foucault. And all I'm going to say as tactfully as I can is that his lifestyle is going to be a source of contention as well as his thinking. But he looked at the various institutional, physical, and administrative mechanisms and knowledge structures which exercise power within society. He challenged existing structures in medicine, psychiatry, policing, the prison system. Does this sound familiar? Okay, so he also kept his eye on the present, but he made sure that we were looking at the past so that we could see the influences of the past in the present and how that would work itself out in the future. They also looked at America itself, because we have this wonderful, rich tradition of social activism. So everybody from Harriet Tubman to Frederick Douglass to W.E. Du Bois to Cesar Chavez to Martin Luther King to the Black Power and Chicano movements, they studied all of these people and all of these movements to gain some understanding of what they could come up with to combat racial inequality. So this was very much a study of all of these frameworks and philosophies and understandings. Any questions so far? Is this beginning to make sense? Yes?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so let's talk about the intellectual father of the movement. This is Derek Bell, and I understand from Gaynell Weathers that she brought him here to Rochester, so many of you may be familiar with him. He is the author of many of the CRT foundational texts. He was a civil rights lawyer, a legal scholar, a beloved professor, writer, and activist. He worked for the U.S. Justice Department, the NAACP. He worked along Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. He was a full-time visiting professor at NYU. He was the first tenured African-American law professor at Harvard, first African-American dean of law at the University of Oregon. He studied racial struggles within education. We're going to talk about at least one of his understandings as an analytical tool that is used to understand educational inequity today. We're also going to talk about the interest convergence principle. His book, Race, Racism in American Law, is standard coursework in law schools across this country. He was a science fiction writer. You also need to know that he was from a Black radical tradition. He really felt that racism is permanent and that this equality was probably impossible. He wanted Black people to develop survival skills for life within a white supremacist empire. He also took to task the Black bourgeoisie because he felt that they had allowed their values to be overtaken by materialism, and all they did was further the status quo and capitalist ends, and he called them on it. He also resigned his tenure at Harvard because it refused to hire women of color as tenured professors. So not only did he talk it, he walked it. He is considered the intellectual father. Others, Richard Delgado, Jean Stefanchik, husband and wife team, still working today. You're going to hear Delgado quoted a lot by CRT critics because he says that CRT is actually a movement, that it is a collection of lawyer, scholar, activists who are studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. And that word transformation is going to be a problem for a lot of people. Critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order. And we're going to talk about the equality theory and legal reasoning and this Enlightenment rationalism, because it's not going to be real helpful. The neutral principles and constitutional law, all the things that liberals hold sacred, CRT is going to go after. So that's another reason why you're going to hear a lot of criticisms of this theory, because it's going to say, wait a minute, this liberal order is not helping to move us towards an anti-racist society. Education is a big controversy right now, as you've seen with the screaming people at the school board meetings. And yes, critical race theorists are going to use CRT ideas to understand issues within education, such as Who's being disciplined? Who gets suspended and who doesn't? Tracking, who gets to the AP courses and who's put in the general non-regents track? What's being taught in the curriculum? Barry Swan, who's the president of TIAR, he talks about as a kid remembering how they were indoctrinated into the Cold War understandings of communism and Russia and all of that. He remembers that being part of his childhood curriculum. I'm sure that others of you have that same understanding, that it was drilled into us, this American mythology, the American dream, and who we are as a people. That was part of the curriculum. CRT theorists are going to take a look at that. They're going to look at these IQ tests that we give to children to get them into these advanced programs, and even the achievement testing. What is it really testing? Whose culture? So all of these things are going to have to be addressed. So how are we going to learn this? Well, here's your first homework assignment. You know I love to give homework assignments. And this is basically the first one. Basically, when I was trying to learn about CRT, I was so confused by what I read on social media and heard on the news. I was so confused by it that I didn't know where to look or what to do, and just really was not satisfied with what I heard. So I went online and I started looking up syllabi to find out what the colleges were teaching. And I kept running across this same text again and again and again. So I figured if it was good enough for students, it was good enough for us. So I got the book and read it so that I would understand from the horse's mouth, this is a primary source, what is this critical race theory about? So this book is perfect for study groups. It is designed for students. It gives you the explanation of CRT first, and then there are a series of questions that you can either answer yourself or in a group, and really kind of start to play with the tenets and understandings of CRT. So this is something I would definitely recommend to you as being perfect for all of you to get a better understanding of CRT. So let's start talking about CRT itself. So what is it? Well, it proposes that the legal analysis, remember, these are lawyer scholar activists, the legal analysis of American society must pay attention to the impact of racism and the role of the concept of race in the forming of attitudes and the construction of our institutions. It is a tool that seeks to uncover the ways in which policies, practices, procedures, and institutions work to perpetuate racial inequity. It's a lens for examining the structural elements behind the disparities. Why do whites have such a wealth? Why is there such a wealth gap between whites and Blacks? What about educational attainment? Why are there disparities in educational attainment between groups? What about housing? Why is it that they claim only 40% of Blacks own a home, whereas with whites, I think it's 70% plus? Who actually gets arrested and given long sentences? Are there disparities? And COVID has just illuminated the health disparities in this culture. CRT is going to want to know what's causing that. The critics are right. CRT does believe that race is nothing more than a social construct that is made up for the convenience of those in power, and that it's embedded in society. It's the air we breathe and the water we drink. And this is where liberalism comes under attack, because liberalism has been telling us that there is a color blindness. We don't see color. all we see are human beings. We're all the same. There's color blindness, the belief in neutral constitutional laws. Lady Justice is blind. Our justice system is objective and impartial. Our laws are neutral. Equal treatment. Is that possible with our history? And the whole post-racial, oh my goodness, we elected a Black president. What more do y'all want? This is a post-racial society. We do not need to talk about this race and racism stuff anymore. CRT is going to say to liberalism, no. CRT is also a social justice movement that examines the relationship between equality principles of the 14th Amendment and liberty principles of the First Amendment. So we've got some problems, and this is another source of contention and debate between CRT and its critics, the use of the 14th Amendment and the First Amendment, okay? Lastly, it is a scholarly legal analysis that challenges the ability of conventional legal strategies to deliver social and economic justice. And it calls for legal approaches that take into consideration race as a central point of American life. So remember, these are scholars. They're going to be using a scientific method. They're going to be looking for evidence. CRT is about pattern recognition. That's what it is. So let's look at some basic tenets. One, the critics again are right. CRT does claim that racism is normal and ordinary. And they're going to say that people like me, we just experience all the time. It's no big deal. It's everyday life. And that liberalism is just a cover up for this reality. This interest convergence, this is Derek Bell. And basically, I'm going to say it this way. The only reason, according to Derek Bell, that Blacks or any other people make any kind of significant gains of civil rights is because it benefits whites. If there's no gain for white people, it's not going to happen. That's interest convergence. My Black interests converge with your white interests. And once there's a conversion and it's a payoff for both of us, then things will move. Without that, no movement. And you know what he uses? The Brown versus the Board of Education. He claimed that the only reason the Supreme Court said, okay, let's desegregate the schools is because the United States was at a point where it wanted to get into the international markets and on the international stage. And the powers that be felt it wouldn't look really good if other nations looked at this country and saw this whites only and no Blacks allowed and saw this segregation. And then they'd look at us like, who and what are you? So better we get rid of all of that for now so we can improve our international standing. That's why the schools are desegregated. This whole thing about race, oh my goodness, CRT documents the different definitions of race. Who's Black, who isn't? Is it 1/8? Is it 1/16? Who's Native, who isn't? What is the blood quantum? Is it 25%? Is it 50%? It depended on the needs that were being served. Now with Blacks, if you make a law, which they did, that any child born of an African mother, an enslaved woman, was Black, then you could keep ownership, and that was money. However, with Native peoples, the goal was to get the land. So what you need to do is, as everybody's mixing together and people are being pushed and assimilated, if you marry them off, You know, you can reduce the blood quantum and then require 50% blood quantum or you're not native. So for Blacks, 1 drop rule, 1 drop of African blood, you're Black. Natives, you need to be 50% Native American or you're not Native anymore. Who's white? Are the Irish white? Are the Italians? Are Jews? I'm not sure. What's the need? This is why they say that race is nothing but a social construction, manipulated, invented, and has no root in biological science. The differential racialization is exactly what I pointed out with the difference between what happened to Native peoples and Africans, okay? There's these differences of racialization, so each group has its own unique stories. And with that came its own unique stereotypes, which are revised and updated. So there's this ever-evolving history of each racial group. Any questions about these first 4? Comments? David
Can you
Lee,
tell me
raised-
what, can you
Yes.
tell me what BIPOC stands for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Black, Indigenous, People of Color. That's the latest lingo for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Some people don't like it, but that's the latest lingo. Any other questions or comments?
Roberta, I just want to say that I find it really interesting and revealing and helpful that that you've been able to distinguish the differences in race according to how much blood is, you know, the different, what do you call blood
Quantum
lines? Because I've not thought of it that way at all, and so thank you. That's really very useful. Well,
Any
and
other
Dave-
questions? Go
David.
ahead.
Hi. I was just, as you talked about that, I was thinking about the eugenics movement of the early 20th century, and a lot of Americans who are probably against CRT are not aware that they were not considered white. And the immigration law that we passed in the early 1920s specifically eliminated Italians and Jews and Slavs and Irish because they were not white. But we've changed that. They have since been allowed to become white.
Yes.
And this is something that a lot of people don't understand. This guy Miller that worked for Trump is Jewish, and he is the one that ran the genocidal progress on our southern border, and he forgets that he was allowed to become white only recently. So
only recently.
Right. So
exactly. Exactly.
And I know David Lee has his hand raised.
Oh, yes, please.
Thank you very much for this, this introduction to this concept and very acute observations about American society. I agree completely. I also disagree in the sense that how generalizable is critical race theory to other cultures? Because I think that is a very powerful way to look at American history, but it's a little less, and perhaps Western history, but it's not. It's a little bit limited in the sense that it doesn't explain, as it were, the differential power structures and statuses that occur in Asia as well as in Africa.
Oh yes, every country has its own history, and CRT was founded here. And even though it was, it looked at European backgrounds and philosophies to understand what was happening. It also made sure it looked specifically at what was happening in this country. So Asia has its own history. Africa has its, and all those countries in Africa have their own history. This is really about American history. So absolutely right. Let me show you two more tenets, and then we'll continue this discussion. Intersectionality, you're going to hear about this as well. This was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. You're going to hear her name a lot. And the way the CRT critics at this point are teaching it is exactly the opposite of what she's saying. Intersectionality just means that no one has a single unitary identity, that we are these complex beings who have lots of different parts to us. And so an example would be a Mexican Irish activist may belong to all of these identities. This person may talk about being gender fluid. They might be talking about being LGBT. They could be a member of the Working Family Party. They could be DACA. They could be Unitarian. All of these identities are sources for them to understand themselves and the world around them. These identities may overlap, and you might find this within yourself. You may have contradictory, conflicting loyalties and allegiances that are based on this more complex understanding of human development and human understanding of self. And what Kimberly is saying is that because of this understanding, we need to create some new vocabularies, and new laws are actually needed to provide for people who have these multiple identities, and that there are multiple oppressions. So for instance, a Black woman, there's the feminist perspective of the oppression of women, but there's also the other oppression of being Black. That's a multiple oppression, okay? You may be have one identity that pushes you up in society, and another part of who you are, like being a white gay man. So this is what she's saying, that we need to look at each other with a more fuller understanding of what it means to be human. The last basic tenet is another one you'll hear complained about, that CRT claims that the voice of BIPOC people are unique in their understandings due to their unique histories, and that they have information about race and racism that may not be known by non-BIPOC people. So you're going to hear a lot about storytelling right now. Every time I turn around, there's another storytelling webinar on how to tell your story, how to develop it, who to tell it to, because the voices that were erased and quieted and not allowed to speak are now being encouraged to speak, so that this whole, what I think that was David that was talking, this whole history of America can actually be known. So if in our curriculum, we never allowed Mexicans or Jewish people or Native peoples to speak, we want to hear these stories now so we can have a better understanding of our culture here in America, because apparently we don't even know American history. So that becomes a problem. So let me keep going. Here are the views of the world. Here's equality, and this is liberalism. You give everybody the same, and supposedly that's going to be good enough. Equity, this is the reverse discrimination. And this is where some people need a little bit more help. So we're going to give them a little bit more help so you get the help you need so that everyone can see. Here's what CRT sees as the reality. That some people have been propped way up. Others have gotten a little bit of help. And we dig holes for others. What CRT wants to see is liberation. That whatever the barricades are, whatever the obstacles are, whatever the blocks are to full participation, and what Lady Justice envisions for us, what our Constitution and Declaration of Independence claim, That's what is hoped for. And whatever ways we can find to remove all these obstacles so that no matter who you are, you get to participate as well as you can. So liberation is the goal of CRT. Now, is there proof of a problem? Well, it's what I talked about before. When they do the research, remember, this is scientific method. When they do the research, who's likely to be rejected for loans, housing, and jobs? They found disparities. When you look at the prison population, who's there? Even though this is a criminal society, a drug abusing society, we've got all sorts of people doing all sorts of things at all levels of society, but who ends up with the longer sentences? Who ends up in prison? Why is it nearly all the high wage earners in this society are the surgeons, the senators, the CEOs, the university presidents are white and usually male? Why is it that poverty often has a brown, black, red face? Yellow too, because the Asian Americans are definitely disputing this whole model minority stereotype. Why do white families have a lot more assets than Black families? And COVID, shorter lifespans, poorer health care, paying more for products and services, completing fewer years of schooling, more low-wage jobs. Why is there more exposure to environmental toxins in Black neighborhoods? Where were they built? What's built next to them? Who's suffering the impacts of global warming right now? Whose islands are being over flooded? Whose homes are being lost? The thing about CRT is they don't care what your intent is. They only want to know about the outcomes. Yes, you didn't mean for that talcum powder to poison women, but they ended up with ovarian cancer. So whether it was your intent or not, the outcome was they ended up with cancer. So that's what CRT is about. So what is happening today? Yes, Derek Bell is still the standard. And yes, it's understood that the legal landscape cannot be understood outside of race and race inequality. Yes, lawyers are applying CRT principles. Yes, there are calls for the laws to regulate the hate speech. And yes, a key focus continues to be white supremacy and privilege that is untouched in spite of laws and constitutional protections. They see the law and the legal system as part of the process. And so yes, CRT theorists are engaged in social movements and counter mobilizations. I'm going to keep going because I know the time is running short. The education piece, and this is what you're going to hear with the screaming. You need to know that CRT is a college level course, primarily taught at law schools. However, its tenets are being studied for application in many disciplines. Now, I think it was David who was asking about cross-cultural, cross-country analysis in CRT. You need to know that it's being applied across the planet because globalization and that doctrine of discovery sent European methodology, European thinking, European oppression, European structures across the planet. So oppressed peoples across the planet are using CRT to understand what has happened to them, and they are applying it accordingly within their distinct patterns of history. So yes, it is being used cross-culturally. Now, what is actually happening in K through 12? Yeah, there's some programs that are looking at CRT principles like we talked about. I looked at Rochester. You're not going to find any superintendent in this county that's going to claim they're using CRT curriculum. What they will say is that they're using culturally responsive and anti-racism. So there's this anti-racism curriculum project. I'm sure you're familiar with Shane Wigan and his research on Rochester's redlining and the impact that had on Blacks in particular, but other peoples of color. They're doing a whole project on that. There was a superintendent's letter from all the superintendents in Monroe County committing themselves to educational racial equity. Rock Acts, which is a social justice faith initiative, has met with some of these superintendents, and what you'll hear is about culturally responsive pedagogy, not CRT. Here's another homework assignment for you. On March the 12th, there's going to be a Greater Rock Anti-Racism Education Conference. I'm going to invite all of you to attend so you can find out exactly what is happening in the school districts, what they're really about, and what it means to have an anti-racism curriculum. So when these people are screaming at school board members, you can have intelligent talking points. What is happening in our districts is culturally responsive pedagogy, and this recognizes the importance of including students' cultural references in all aspects of learning. It's making meaningful connections between school and the students' cultural experiences, languages, and life. So what you'll see, like in one district we met with, they talked about making sure they understand the demographics of their student population. So when they're looking at the curriculum and the visuals and the books, the type of books that they purchase and the textbooks that they're using and the activities that they're fostering with families and understanding those families' cultural references and understandings and bringing them into the school, there is this exchange so that the children, when they walk into the school, they can see themselves and their cultures reflected. They have this feeling of welcome, and they know that their cultures and languages and understandings are respected and welcome. And it's not just this monoculture that those of us my age experienced when we were in school, which basically was European American. They're not doing that. And for some people, that's a problem. So here's some of what I said: Marxist theory, racism is normal, CRT, they claim that CRT itself is anti-Semitic and racist, that it says there are only two classes of people, oppressed and oppressor, that it's a worldly ideology of evil. The big one I hear is that it's making Black kids hate whites and white kids to hate themselves. So that's a big one you're going to hear. So that's some of what I've heard. So here's the sides. You've got the 1619 Project, which says that enslavement should be, and African Americans should be the nexus, the central point out of which we should be educating and talking about American history. The 1776 Project is Trump brought together his people, and they said, no, America is exceptional. We have the American dream open to everyone, and what should be taught in schools is that we are a process that is unfolding, but we're moving towards democracy and liberty and justice for all. That's what should be taught to children. One side says race and racism is the organizing principle. The other side says no, the Declaration of Independence is our organizing principle. One side says there are 140 million poor and low wealth in this culture. The other side says no, American exceptionalism. One side said continued oppression because of poverty, systemic racism, the war economy, ecological devastation. The other side says the arc of the universe, these are Obama's words, the arc of the universe is bent towards justice. And then they add, as is the American way of life. One side says activist is needed, the other side calls it identity politics. And both sides say children should be taught truth of American history. Okay. What is this? It's been an injury to collective memory. The stories, the artifacts, the food, the drink, the symbols, the traditions that we as Americans hold sacred. That's what CRT is. It's an injury to our collective memory. Our rituals, our memorials, our totems, which is an Ojibwe word, meaning our blood connection with. our traditions, transmitting traditional beliefs. Some people will say that this collective memory is nothing more than a manipulated construction by those who hold power and status to tell us what we're going to believe, which is where the curriculum comes in, because the curriculum is supposed to tell children who and what we are and to form this collective memory. And we need that curriculum to tell the American story of American exceptionalism and manifest destiny. We need to stabilize the status quo. So this collective memory is used to establish authority. So let's look at some images, some of our totems. I'll give you a minute to look those over. Oh, that's a statue of Robert E. Lee. The one with the hand up is Christopher Columbus. I've got January 6th was a great exploration for the scholars. They've been studying this for a year now. All the totems, all these sacred objects and images and rituals, the American flag, the Confederate flag, the Trump flag, the Christian symbolism. The hanging tree is one of our totems, just like the Lady Justice. She's a totem, this representation of a concept or principle. The Bible, all of this is part of collective memory that people want taught and preserved. So here's the bottom line. CRT states that the legacy of slavery, segregation, and second-class citizenship of people of color in this country continues to permeate. The other side says that CRT is an existential threat. How are we to make meaning when you're using identity politics and giving off an ahistorical narrative? In other words, what CRT is saying about America is not the truth. And it's trying to destroy America and its ideals, that all men are created equal, are endowed by Creator with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the bottom line. That's what CRT is about. It's a threat. So now I open up the floor. Can you name some of these threats? You've heard people screaming. I know you've talked to your families about CRT. So what are some of these threats? What time is it? Oh my goodness. Can anybody name any threats that they've heard from their relatives or seen on TV? What these threats are to the American way of life? What is CRT doing?
Dividing us.
All right, it's dividing us. What else is it doing?
Threatens people's narratives that they're comfortable with.
Okay. What else is it doing?
Making white children feel inferior and unloved.
Feeling unloved and inferior. Wow. What else?
Making white children feel guilty.
All right, white kids feel guilty. What else? What are some of the threats?
Control over their children.
Say one more time, please.
Just threatens some parents' control over their children.
Okay, so they're losing control of children. Oh, that's a good one. Okay. Any other threats that you've heard?
Dividing us.
All right, dividing us. Okay, anything else?
The fear that they will, quote, be replaced, unquote.
Be replaced. Okay. So there's that whole replacement theory. Okay. Okay.
And basically that they'll lose their power.
Okay.
We will lose our power.
Okay.
Bob Carlisle has his hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I cannot see any of you, so please just talk.
Okay. I'm wondering if you would be willing to share your slides with us, especially 10, 11, 12, but I think all of them. We will all say that this has been an excellent presentation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, I will just finish up by putting some of what I discovered when I was going through my research, and I think you've said it all. What CRT is going to say that it's merely being used as a smokescreen to hide. Okay, that exactly what you were talking about, the identity status, that we'll lose control. We may need to recompense people for what happened, the hypocrisy, that people find out what I was really about. I need you to know that this is considered an election crisis, that this is part of the political power grabbing, that they're really frightened by the Black Lives Matter movement, and that there were youth of all racial and ethnic groups marching for Black Lives Matter. And that whole about losing control of your children, I think that really frightened a lot of people. They're worried about the 2022 midterm elections and what that could mean and what it might mean in the future if the youth decide that all this racial inequity is no longer to be tolerated. What would that mean for this society? There's a loss of identity status for a lot of people, exactly what you're saying. Who's going to replace me? How am I going to feel like anything if I don't have this status of being white anymore? And that doesn't mean what it used to. So this is a threat for a lot of people, and you have to understand that. How much time do I have, Elaine? Because you know how I am. I'll just keep talking.
That's a question for Corey.
Corey, what do you want to do? Should I stop here and just give you your homework assignment?
I was gonna say, let me stop the recording. Let me thank you for doing this.
Okay, I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna go through all of this, but I'm just gonna give you your homework assignment, which is, what do the cultures to which you belong have to say about this, and what personal intersectionalities might help or hinder? Did anything that we talked about with the land acknowledgements impact any of your understandings? And what are your possible responses as an individual, a Rogestarian, and definitely as a Presbyterian? That's what I would be interested in hearing about before we turn everything off. What would be some possible responses to what you've heard today?
I hear a noise that I'm not sure what it's about, but it's a background noise of some kind. So, yeah, let me just go back to your list prior, Roberta, and say that one of the things that you mentioned as a fear is Black retribution.
Yeah,
and that is so old. That is exactly what brought on the Jim Crow laws and all of that negativity that followed the freeing, so-called, of slaves, was white people fearing the retribution of the slaves. And we seem evidently not to get beyond that. And I think that is just the saddest thing. Okay, now I've said enough.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think that anytime when people think that other people might be holding a grudge against them because of some real or imagined mistreatment, there's that fear response, which I would have talked about more, that these are fear responses that people are having to what they perceive as a threat, an existential threat. Anybody else? Any possible responses to this controversy around CRT?
It's David Lee again. I guess my question is that, CRT is a powerful analytic technique.
Right.
But what is the synthesis that it's striving toward? What is the ideal that it wishes to apply that can bind us together, not just separate us?
Well, I think it really isn't trying to separate people. It's just trying to figure out why this culture continues to have the kind of disparities of outcomes that we continue to see. I think the people in the law discipline, some of them were just really disappointed with what happened after the 60s. I think a lot of people really felt that once we got those laws in place, what we would see is a more just, more fair, more equitable reality. And when that didn't happen, and there continued to be this pushback and people undermining laws and stripping back laws and finding ways around the law, people within that discipline started to look for other ways to achieve the same end. They have one end in sight, and that's for a fair, just, equitable, the beloved community kind of experience for everybody. And they thought they had it. They didn't. And so they've come up with some new analytical techniques through which they could figure out what the variables are that are leading to these disparities and figuring out what they can do to fix it. So they've become activists working in many, many different ways to see if they can bring about what we started with, which was Lady Justice, because that's who they are. They're about justice and fairness and rightness in society. That's their ideal. And so when they see it being flouted and disparaged and ignored, meanwhile, Lady Justice is sitting at the front door of the Supreme Court, people really, that is a threat to their identity. That is a threat to their existence. That is a threat to everything they put themselves into, because it becomes more like a scam, more like a charade or something. And I think that's where it's coming from.
Can I?
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to add, and I'll wrap in some of the responses to possible, where the possible responses as an individual. And that's how I'll try to answer David's question as well. To me, the way that this starts is that in the curricula, as an individual, one of my questions for my 4-year-old child growing up now, especially in any school she's going to attend, is, what are you teaching her? Because ultimately we want to be an intentional society, in my opinion. And part of being intentional means that you have to understand the full history of how we got to this point, so that we can actually move forward as every individual being intentional. I think part of the issue that we have currently in this country in particular is that for certain populations, primarily the white population, they've been allowed to kind of live in this bubble in the sense of not understanding the structural implications of what other people have had to deal with in this country. And so I would say it starts when you start thinking about how can we change it. One tangible example, and I'll link together of land acknowledgements and everything else in our indigenous population. I remember in elementary school learning about the Trail of Tears. That was it. So as an individual, how can I be more intentional? And I think CRT's role in that is actually, as a part of the curriculum, teaching it wasn't just the Trail of Tears. There was a whole lot of things that led up to that. There's a whole lot of things still happening now. So that as an individual, I understand, okay, this is what I can do. I can collaborate with that community. And that kind of, that starts with the land acknowledgements, that starts with the reflection, but it also starts with understanding that I, as an individual, have to be more intentional. And part of that intentionality is collaborating, reaching out to other groups to understand how I can help them as an ally. And I think, so I don't know if that entirely answers your question, but I think when we start talking about how we can change the curriculum here and there, I think it starts with, where are we today and what can we do to enhance that curriculum so that everyone understands their role and being more intentional moving forward. So that's how I kind of process it.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jonathan.
Obviously, we can keep this conversation going till noontime. But I'll be speaking about this in one of my forums coming up on Heschel again. But the thing that bothers me, I guess, is that there is a an unspoken assumption that somehow society generates our attitudes. And yes, we have to examine society for its attitudes. But the also that is a little bit missing in the conversation, and it's actually, I actually find it refreshing to hear Cornel West talk about this, is that, you know, we have to also examine ourselves
Yes.
deeply. But that then we come up against the conflict. Are we going to be a secular humanist, or are we going to be a sacred humanist? And where do we find our spiritual guidance here? And even that, for me, is complicated by the issue that there's a whole half of the world, mostly in the so-called Orient, that, you know, has a different type of spirituality that does not, that realizes that problems start within ourselves, that greed, anger, and delusion are perhaps, you know, origins of a lot of our troubles. But that is, you know, that really, you know, in your final picture there about, you know, the people with the fence looking at the game, you know, if you take down the fence, all you have is your own self-control. And there's not a lot of talk here about, you know, what constitutes our feeling of mutuality and commonality and connectedness. There's a lot of, I think, unspoken anger here of thwarted and misguided, and, you know, of expectations that are, you know, that are thwarted. And although that's, you know, that's what justice is all about, the idea that things are not fair. But at the same time, there's also not much conversation about what constitutes what our expectations can be and should be. So anyway, that's obviously a very, very, very big conversation to have.
Okay. How can I answer this?
It's not a question. It's just a
yeah. Well, my response is that if you teach the society about American exceptionalism, then that's what people come to expect. And exceptionalism means that you're doing something extraordinary. And when you have 140 million poor and low wealth or dispossessed in a society of 300 plus million, that's nearly 50%. What's exceptional about that? If you say that you have this Declaration of Independence that you flaunt throughout the world, that all are created equal, or that you have this fantastic Constitution that says that we have certain rights, and yet you've got a significant portion of your society that you are not allowing to have those rights. How is that exceptional? So I think what people are saying is that we want the country to live up to what it says it is. And it's the same thing we say on a spiritual level, that when I have to talk about the doctrine of discovery, that these various religions fed into that and prospered through it, then I have to challenge those particular religions to take a look at themselves and say, are you really living up to your creed? So that's where that whole discussion of religion comes in, and expectations that we put, we say all these pretty words and we write all these pretty creeds and constitutions, but where's the follow through? So it is a behavioral thing as well. And I don't think that is an either or, that while you're looking at the society, that precludes looking within, because that's where the spirit, to me, that's where the spirituality comes in, and that's where the humanism comes in. Who am I as an individual? Who am I as a Rochesterian? Who am I as a Presbyterian? That's what intersectionality is about. It's not just about looking around at the society, it's about looking within and understanding, who am I? What do my cultures tell me about this issue? So it's not an either or, David. I think it's an and. that we're trying to look at a more cohesive, comprehensive understanding of human psychology that has a sense of integrity about it. And I think that's where the anger comes from on both sides, this lack of integrity in walking the talk, in following the preaching and teachings. And I think that's part of what CRT is about, that what we're not seeing is this country living up to its standards. So that's what I would say about these unspoken assumptions. Absolutely, they're unspoken assumptions, but they are directly taught by the society. And they're taught by all these different cultures and identities to which we belong. And justice, we've made sure we understand what justice is. So that's why I started with Lady Justice. We know exactly in this culture what justice means. That's why we have that totem. So there's no confusion about what justice means. None whatsoever. Have we done it?
Corey, are we done?
All right, I know I've kept you a long time. I thank you so much for participating in this and giving me the opportunity to explore this issue a little more deeply. Each of these gives me an opportunity to do even more research and to listen to your understandings and learn more. I do recommend to you, as I said, the textbook and the anti-racism curriculum conference that's coming up, as well as thinking about your possible responses.
Good, good. Good job.
Thank you.
Roberta,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so very, very much for, I have a sense of the amount of effort that you put into this, but I also know, and let me just say that Roberta has already received a couple of invitations to speak to other groups. And I think one of them is our, what is it called? Corey, what is the Presbyterian Day, something of, what is it called? It's coming up in March. Anyway, so we're so happy to share you with, to make this available, not that we're making it available, but to other people's, and that's wonderful. Corey, do you want to say something about our next forum?
Oh yeah, I'd like to come to hear your next speaker.
Our next one isn't until March. It's March 20th, so a month from now. We're going to have 3 spiritual journeys. Lori Taberry, our interim minister, is doing the first one, and Jonathan Nuegbarocha, I think I said that right, is doing one on his spiritual journey, and Ed Safer, who is still here, is doing one. Between Jonathan and Ed, we have a little break, and David Lee will be giving a presentation on Polly Murray, who is a civil rights activist and a pastor in what church?
Polly Murray is a civil rights womanist, and who became an Episcopal priest at the end of her life. So she's, and also probably transgender, although that was never discussed during her lifetime.
Oh,
I'm more
interesting.
Yeah.
And then,
That
and
sounds
also,
really good.
yeah, and then there's we're also doing one on Rabbi Heschel.
Yeah.
And then in May and June, we're going to have Sebastian come and talk about building mines in South Sudan.
Good.
One on teen empowerment, which we usually have every year. Hopefully we're going to have the Presbytery's racial justice working group come and for us from different churches, see what everybody's up to.
Wow.
One more. What am I missing?
Wow. You guys are really on the ball.
Well, we haven't had any since the it's been slow getting started since the pandemic. So we are especially grateful to have you come and do these. It's been quite a treat.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it so much. And I can't wait to hear some more of these forums now that I know that you guys have these forums. These sound wonderful. So I hope to see you as a participant in the audience in the future.
Awesome. And I'm gonna put I have some notes from some of the previous forums, and I'll try to remember to put out the March 12th anti-racism education conference too.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Roberta, I'll be talking to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Everybody take care. Enjoy the beautiful day. Cold but nice.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, now I can see people. Hi. Nice to see you as well.
Roberta.
Thank you. Hey, Grania. Good to see you sort of again.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not presentable, so.
Hey, I know that feeling. Trying to get presentable for these is hard. Okay.
Roberta, could you share your slides?
I think so. I think so. I'll take a look at them. You know, it's the first time I for each group I redo the slides. So that's sometimes why I don't share them, because I'd like to look them over, think about it again, decide where I needed to, you know, upgrade something. So that's usually why I don't share them, because I just figure, well, maybe I'll use them again, maybe I won't. It depends on how it goes.
Yeah,
what's understood and what isn't.
Thinking just for our personal use, because there was so much information that I couldn't keep up my notes. And so it was just wonderful. Really.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a lot of information. This is complex.
So much.
Yeah, I understand why people are confused, because I definitely was.
It was I just learned so much about what critical race theory really is, as opposed to what gets repeated in the press. And so I just thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, that's the next one you need to do, Corey. You need to talk to us about journalism in this country. We need to have some forums on the quality of journalism and what they're supposed to be doing and helping us to understand things. And that's what I would request from Doopsy. A forum on journalism. Get some of these journalists in so we could have a discussion with them about what they're doing in this culture.
Yeah, especially current journalists. I think they did have
Evan Dawson.
Oh, you did have Evan Dawson. Oh,
and we've had David K. Johnston.
Really? Oh, I wish I would have known. Yeah, I gotta pay more attention to what you guys are doing, because wow.
You should another journalist that's really doing a good job is Jim Goodman. He used to work for the Democrat and Chronicle, and they fired him several years ago. Now he writes mostly for the Progressive magazine and does such a wonderful job on immigration issues.
Okay. All right.
He's very, very careful and true to his profession.
Yeah.
Roberta,
yes,
Bob
Carla.
Over the slides, but I had noted that I thought slides 10, 11, and 12 were especially helpful. They were just the tenets.
Okay.
And,
okay.
Oh, and I think 12 was the cartoon. but it was
Oh,
wonderful.
with the boxes.
Yeah.
With the boxes.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. It really
Okay.
illustrates well.
Picture says 1,000 words. So,
I think so too.
yeah, it's really
All right.
All right,
Thank
thank you.
so
We're
much.
gonna let Roberta go.
All right,
I'm gonna
thank you
end the
Bye,
so much.
Roberta.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.